Okay, everybody, welcome back to another class of Nach, which is abbreviations for Niv'im and Ketuvim, the prophets and the writings, book of a gloss over Jewish history through the eyes of the Bible. Today's topic is the 6th and 7th chapters of the book of Shoftim. And we have more people joining the class. Welcome those people who are joining the class. You can feel free to close your videos so that we can send this out to others. Okay, chapter 6 begins in the same way every other chapter. This is there's something called a broken record, right? The broken record is that when the children of Israel don't learn the message, then they end up repeating the same mistakes from the previous generation, the same mistakes from their neighbors, the same mistakes from the next tribe over, and they go through the same process over and over and over again. That we've learned is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing and expecting different results. And that's exactly what happens here. Now, we noted that in the first stories of Ehud, Otniel, Ehud, and Dvorah, they were nevertheless on a high level. They were on a level that God sent them a judge, a prophet, a leader who acted in a very morally proper way, and we'll see that it continues somewhat here, but this could be a turning point for the book of Shoftim, where we seem to go in a negative direction. Let's see. The story begins like every other beginning. The Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, sin in the eyes of the Lord. Usually when it says that, it's referring to idolatry, okay? And therefore they had to serve the Midianites for 7 years. Now here, it gives us another detail, which is interesting, that the Israelites went into the caves. Hold on, we have someone else, Gosha. Went into the caves and they hid from the Midianites in the caves. The commentary is trying to figure out why they needed to go and hide in the caves. Interestingly, the archaeologists found lots of caves in the land of Israel, lots of tunnels and caves that were used by Jews to hide against mostly the Romans. But we have this notion of going into the caves to protect against the enemy. What the Midianites did, when they're all hiding in the caves, is they destroyed all of the crop. And when they destroy the crop, then obviously they're going to die of starvation. And they attacked all the produce and left no means of sustenance for Israel, nor a sheep, nor an ox. As soon as they came up from the caves, of course, Israel would be killed. So this is a deadly situation. And when Israel got to the lowest level, and this is once again a message that Israel it forgets about God, and when they get really, really bad, when things go completely wrong and there's no hope, that's when in verse 7 they call out to God. Right? And what did God do? God sends a prophet to the children of Israel. Now the prophet comes and he yells at them. The prophet is not the savior. The prophet is the one who is going to say the following. Verse 8, thus said the Lord, God of Israel, I brought you out of Egypt, and I freed you from bondage, and I rescued from the Egyptians, and I brought you to the land. And I said to you, I'm the Lord your God. Don't worship other gods. But you didn't obey me. So this is, once again, like the refrain, the children of Israel call out to God, and God, before he goes and he sends his salvation, he also gives them a little musar. He yells at them. He says, you guys aren't listening. Now, an angel of the Lord, in verse 11, went to the house of Yoash, Aviha Ezri, and his son Gidon, who is our hero, was beating out wheat inside a wine press in order to keep it safe from the Midianites. Okay, so it's interesting that it describes in a little more detail the ways in which they were trying to protect their food. And of course, when an angel appears to an individual in the Bible, the individual doesn't know it's an angel. And therefore, the angel appears and says to him, God is with you, you valiant warrior. And in Gidon, responding to what he thought was a regular person and not a messenger of God, says, and where's God? Is God really with us? If he was, so then, what about all those great stories of how we left Egypt and with a strong hand? Where is God now? Why is he forsaken us and left us in the hands of the Midianites? With some bold words from Gideon, okay, but that's how he felt. Thus, in verse 14, the Lord or the messenger turned to Gideon and said, Lech b'kochacha zeh v'hoshat et Yisrael mikaf Midyan. Halo shlachticha. Go with this strength. What does it mean? So it kind of means that, Gideon was not a shy person. Gideon was a person who spoke his mind and saw justice and saw injustice and was willing to say it. And he didn't care if he was a person, if he was an angel, if he was God himself. He was going to tell him what is the deal. And God, according to the Bible, says that attitude, that strength, that fortitude, that's what's going to defeat the Midianites. So he understood that this is God already. This is, he had a revelation. And he turns in 15 to verse and he says, please, my Lord, how can I deliver Israel? I'm but a poor member of the tribe of Menashe, and I'm the youngest in my family. And God responds to him in verse 16, I will be with you, and you will destroy Midian. Who does that remind us of? It reminds us of Moshe. Remember, God says to Moshe, go, and Moshe says, but who am I? What am I going to do? And God responds with those words. He says, I will be with you, and you will take care of him. And does Moshe suffice with that? Is he happy with that? No. Moshe says, no, give me a sign. And you know what? Gideon also says, give me a sign. If you look, verse 17, he says, if it would be okay if I found favor in you, please give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. A little bold as well, right? God speaks to you and you say, well, are you really God? So God, okay, goes along with it, and he says, okay. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the matzah, the unleavened bread, right? Put them on the rock and spill out the liquid. So he did so, and then he held out the staff that he carried. He touched the meat with its tip, and a fire came up and consumed the meat, and the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. So it's a miracle, right? He showed him like this amazing miracle. So Gideon answers like every good person who sees God face to face in verse 22. Looks like I'm going to die because you're not allowed to see God face to face. And in verse 23, he says, no, don't worry, you will not die. And Gideon makes a mizbeach, makes an altar, and he calls the place Hashem Shalom. Hashem Shalom, God, peace. Interesting. Now that night, in verse 25, God says to him, take a young bull, pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the sacred post which is beside it, and then built an altar to God. So Bilam, now we find out more information. Bilam's father was an idol worshiper. He worshipped the idol called Baal, which we'll meet over the course of our studies. Bilam's, God tells Bilam, you have to destroy that. Now, if you have a little bit of memory about different biblical personalities who destroyed the altars, the idols, do you remember? So the answer is, there's a famous midrash, and the midrash is that Abraham destroys his father's idols. Now it's interesting that midrash, that's pshat, that's what happens here in our story. Gideon is told by God to destroy his father's idol, and instead to set up an altar to God. And that's exactly what he does. And in the morning, his father sees that his idol is destroyed and his Asherah is cut down. And he says, who did such a thing? And they found out it was Gideon, the son of Yoash, who did this. So the people said to the Yoash, hey, we're going to have to kill your son. I mean, he took all of our idols. He destroyed all of our good altars and our idols. Let's kill him. And Yoash said, do you have to contend for the Baal? Do you have to vindicate him? Whoever fights his battles shall be dead by morning. If he is a god, let him fight his own battles, since it is that altar that has been torn up. But he basically says, he supports his son, and he says, what has this Baal done for us? That we're going to go kill him just because they cut him down? Let the Baal take care of it. So at that moment, okay, was a turning point for the people, that they understood that they've been barking up the wrong tree, that they've been following the wrong type of leader. They've been worshiping this Baal, and the Baal has done nothing for them. On that day, verse 32, Gideon's name was changed. His name became Yerubbaal, which means that he who destroyed and fought against the Baal, the idolatry, and brought the people together. And therefore, Gideon becomes a real hero in this story, because he understands that the battle against the political enemy is first and foremost a battle against the idolatry. Spiritual battle and the political battle in the Bible are very often one and the same. So Gideon gets a group together, or he wants to get the group together, because in verse 33, Midian and Amalek gather in a place called Emek Yisrael, which is in the heart of the Galilee, the center of the northern Israel. And Gideon gets a spirit of God. The spirit of God kind of adorns him, and he blows the shofar, and he sends messengers all over the tribe of Manasseh. And he sends messenger to the tribe of Asher and the tribe of Zulin, the tribe of Naphtali, and they join him. And Gideon says to God, if you are really going to save, then I'd like you to fulfill this additional test. I think that the idea is that it was a time when, in ancient biblical times, God was very evident. And yet when there's an absence of God, so then there's a lot of skepticism. So comes along Gideon and says, I'm going to place this wool on the floor. Now, if dew falls tomorrow on the fleece, and on the rest of the of the land it is dry, I will know that you did this miracle. And that's exactly what happened next day. And he said, don't be angry with me, God, but do the exact opposite thing. Let me see that it flowed everywhere, but on this, and that's exactly what happened. So Gideon needed several tests, several signs, several miracles in order to be convinced that he's going to go and fight. In chapter 7, I keep saying Bila, Gideon gathers the people, and they gather to a place called Ein Charod. Right? We know where that is today. Today there's the pools of Gideon, right on the bottom of the mountain range near Beit Shan, by the Jordan, in the Emek. And people were very inspired, and they all came to Gideon. Verse 2, God says to Gideon, you know what? You have too many troops. It's time to, whittle away the, people. Maybe they heard that they were going to get a reward or something, so they didn't have the best intentions. And also, it's much more powerful of a miracle if God saves Israel with a small army rather than a large army. So he says, how many people are left? So he told people to leave. 22,000 left, and 10,000 remained. So Gideon's like, okay, great. I have 10,000. That's a strong army. We're going to go fight against Midian. Verse 4, God says, no, it's still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and we'll do a little test. And whoever passes the test, they will be in your army. So he brings them down to the water, and he says, everybody drink water. Okay? This is verse 5. And God says to Gideon, everyone who gets on their knees and licks like a dog, okay? Anyone who gets on their knees and licks the water, they need to be sent away. Anyone who doesn't get on their knees, but rather brings the water up, we're only 300. What's the idea? The commentaries explain that those people who get on their knees, they were used to idolatry. They saw water and they naturally assumed the position of the idolatrous position. The ones who actually stood firm and just lifted the water up to their mouths, they were more righteous, and therefore they were going to become the army of Gideon. That's exactly what happened. Gideon goes to fight against all of Midian in the valley of Jezreel with only 300 soldiers. And in the middle of the night, God comes to Gideon and says, all right, now is the time. Go and fight against Midian. Now, Midian and Amalek, they had this huge army, okay? Gideon heard the stream, and in verse 16, he divides the 300 men into 3 groups, and he gives them all a ram's horn, a shofar, and basically he gives them empty buckets, and he gives them lanterns or fires to hold on to. And what they do is they basically frighten the Midianite army in the middle of the night with lots of noise and lots of fire, and it made it seem like they were in the throngs, and they cause chaos throughout the entire army. And those 300 shofarot caused a major chaos, and the people started running away. And they ran all the way to Avel Mecholah, all the way up away, and then the people from Naphtali and from Asher ran after him. Gideon is still on the chase, and in verse 24, he sends messengers to Ephraim. He says, "Go ahead and seize their access to the water along the Jordan." And they did that, and they pursued the enemy, the two generals. One was called Orev, and one was Ze'ev, and they killed him on the spot, and they brought the heads of Orev and Ze'ev to Gideon. This seems like a major success, and the Navi continues into chapter 8. Now the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why did you do that to us? Why didn't you call us to go fight against the Midianim?" They were breakers. They were upset at Gideon that they weren't included earlier. So Gideon responds, "After all I've done for you, you're complaining? Isn't it better that you get something rather than nothing? God delivered the Midianite generals into your hands." So he kind of abated their anger, and we're sensing a certain tension, okay, between the different tribes. And Gideon having done as much as possible, nevertheless there was resentment that was taking place. Now, another sad story that happens here, which is also reflective of a bit of a complicated, disjointed Israel at the time. Okay, in verse 3, they succeeded, that they ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. So by verse 4, they come back to the Jordan, come back south, and they're all those 300 who really were the main perpetrators of this battle were tired, and they, but they were still in pursuit. They were hungry. So he said to the people in the city of Sukkot, the Israelites, "Okay, please give us some loaves of bread to the men who are following me, for they're very hungry. And I'm still running after two more generals named Zevach and Salmunah." And they said no. They responded, "Are Zevach and Salmunah already in your hands that we should give bread to your troops?" In other words, we're not giving you any food because you haven't won the war yet. Now, Gideon's reaction here might be a little extreme, but nevertheless, this is a reflection of the fact that they didn't have faith. They weren't listening to a messenger of God. They weren't listening to a judge. They were simply worried about their own self-interest. And for Gideon's perspective, that is unconscionable, not acceptable. So Gideon, in the middle of his battle, okay, in verse 7, says the following frightening statement: "I swear, when the Lord delivers Zevach and Salmunah into my hands, I'm going to thresh your bodies upon desert thorns and briars." Basically, I'm coming after you afterwards. Gideon keeps running, and he goes to Penuel, and the people of Penuel said the same thing as the people of Sukkot. So he said to the people of Penuel, "When I come back, you see this tower? I'm going to destroy the tower," which was basically their city. Verse 10, Zevach and Salmunah were in Karkur. And they had an army of about 15,000. Everyone else was gone, which was like 120,000. So that's a lot of people dead. He marches up the road, up east to Novach, and Yagba, and catches the camp off guard, and they all run away. Gideon's a major success, and he defeats them. And he catches Zebach and Salmunah, the two kings. Now, Gideon returns from the war, tired, fatigued, finishing, having defeated the enemies, the external enemies. And then he captures a boy from among the people of Sukkot, and he interrogates him. And he gave him a list of who the elders of Sukkot are, 77 people. And he comes to Sukkot and he says, I hear the heads of Zebach and Zalmunah, about whom you mocked me. And he took the elders of the city and brought desert thorns and briars, punished the people of Sukkot with them. Basically, he did, he killed them. As for Penuel, he tore down its tower and killed all the people. And then he said to Zebach and Salmunah, those men you killed at Tabor, what were they like? They looked just like you, like sons of a king. They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you have not spared them, I would not kill you. And he commanded his oldest son Yeter, go to kill them. And, this is, once again, this is like stories of battles of ancient times. And he kills these two, right? So Gideon does a lot of killing. Now, he not only does he kill the enemy, Zebach and Salmunah and Midian and Amalek, but he also killed the people who did not fight together with him. Now, it's the right message, but maybe the wrong method. The message is join us together and support and bring out, if you're not going to fight, but at least support us. And instead, they go and reject him. But instead of explaining that to them, he goes and kills them. Nevertheless, look what happens in verse 22. The people of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, your grandson as well, for you have saved us from the Midianites. Now, this is interesting because at this time, right, we never talked about king. It doesn't exactly say king here. It says rule over us, be the ruler over us. After all, he deserved to be the ruler. The fact that the people wanted this ruler didn't have a good taste in Gideon's mouth. And Gideon said something beautiful, which shows us that he was righteous and he was pure. He might have been overzealous, but he was righteous and he was pure. Because in verse 23, this is his answer. I will not rule over you myself, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord alone shall rule over you. Interesting. So this is a very positive message. But then he goes and does something that, in the end, caused him a bit of suffering. What happens? He says, I do have a request to make of you in verse 24. I want you to each give me an earring that you got from the spoils of war. They all said, yeah, of course. He spread it out. The earrings weighed 1,700 shekels of gold, which is an enormous amount. And they had, because all these things, and he made an ephod. An ephod is like a breastplate. And he put all the gold on it. And he thought it would be like a nice symbol of the success that he had. But what happened is that they kind of started to worship it. They thought it was something, holy. They thought it was something that they should follow. Now, that's a side story to the main story that Gideon succeeded. He became the leader. He did very, very well. And in verse 28, Midian submitted. The land was tranquil for 40 years in Gideon's time. Yerubbaal who's Gidon, right, retired to his own house. Now we get to a little strange situation. He was a little busy because he had 70 sons. He had a lot of wives. He also had a Pilegesh, a concubine in Shechem, and she also provided a son. And his son's name is Avimelech. Avimelech means the father of king, or the father who is king. Now, in verse 32, Gidon dies at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash. And after Gidon died, like we started this whole lecture, people sinned once again, following this Baalim, the Baal, the same Baal that he destroyed. The people, the Israelites, started worshiping. They forgot about God, and they kind of forgot about all the kindness and all the good that Gidon did for those years beforehand. And here is where the story gets sad, and according to some, this is a turning point for the book of the Judges. Avimelech, the son of Yerubbaal, sets himself up to become their king. He wants to become the king. And he says, I'm your flesh and blood. Of course, he wasn't exactly a purebred son of Gidon. But, there are people that he won over, and he said, yes, and you can become. And he brought a group of reckless people to be part of his posse. And then he went to his father's house and killed his brothers, 70 of them. Now, this is, something that we are familiar with, that if you want to secure your power, your divine, your position to inherit the throne, you kill all your brothers. And that's what he did. He kills all of his brothers, the sons of Gidon. How terrible is that? There's one child who was hidden. One of the 70th, he was hidden. His name was Yotam. And in verse 6, everyone from the Shechem, they went and they appointed king and proclaimed Avimelech king by a certain tree there, a very prominent one. And then they went and told Yotam, who is actually the rightful heir, and Yotam gives a parable. And the parable is basically telling the people that you're making a big mistake, and you sinned in following Avimelech. Of course, Avimelech wants to kill Yotam, and Yotam runs away from him. And in verse 22, Avimelech, he rules for 3 years. This is not that long. And in the end, it's a long chapter. There's another battle that takes place, and Avimelech ends up running away, and many people die because Avimelech, took the power and usurped and killed everyone. In the end, he was defeated, and not only was he defeated, but he was walking. In verse 50, he was walking at the end of this battle. And a woman, in verse 53, Avimelech pressed forward to the tower and attacked it. He approached the door of the tower, but a woman dropped a millstone on Avimelech's head and cracked his skull. And he said, draw your dagger and finish me off, that it may not be said of me that a woman killed him. And then he died. When the men of when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone went home. Thus, God repaid Abimelech for the evil that he did to his brothers, and he repaid the men of Shechem for all their wickedness. And the curse of Yotam, the son of Yerubbaal, was fulfilled upon them. This is the end of this story. Now, what happens is that this started out with such hope, as the entire book of Shoftim, the book of the Judges. It starts out with a righteous person, and he fulfills and he follows in the ways of God, and it quickly deteriorates into a situation where all of his children are murdered. One son gets the wrong idea. He tried to become the king, even though he wasn't worthy of it. And in the end, the people fall into, and they spiral downwards into a really low point in their living in the land, not following the words of God, and not worshiping in Shiloh, where they're supposed to go. And this is like a turning point. The book, the chapter also shows us that there's a lot of disharmony, to the point of a bloodbath, that Gideon has to kill Israelites, and Israelites are killing each other. And this is one of the sad times that's a reflection of the situation in the time of the judges, where everyone is doing what they want, and there's no strong central authority, and the people are not willing to listen to God, and the message that they get with a specific judge or a specific hero is short-lived and passes by too quickly, and they fall into that spiral once again of sometimes doing the right thing when the people are there, but when they die, they fall into disarray. And that is how we end the 10th chapter of the book of Shoftim. Next week, we will conquer another several chapters. Everyone should have a good week.